Hey, I'm Tanya, your resident behavior analyst, and welcome to part 3 of my Understanding Tantrums series. If you're at your wit's end and you don't know how you're going to keep going with daily numerous tantrums, your toddler screaming down the hall, throwing things, throwing themselves on the floor, causing a scene out in public, there are ways to help reduce those tantrums, and that's what I'm here to help you with. In part 1, I talked about the importance of knowing what the motivation or the purpose of each tantrum is. And in the second part, I talked about how to identify what that motivation is, because sometimes it's a little tricky and it's important to really pinpoint why your child is engaging in those tantrum behaviors from instance to instance, because every time they have a tantrum, it's for a different reason. Today, I want to talk to you about what to do with the information that you have. You've identified the motivation or the purpose of your child's behavior. What do you do with that information? You use it to develop a function-based intervention, which is fancy speak to just come up with a behavioral strategy on how to respond to your child's behavior so that you don't accidentally give in to their motivation for the wrong behavior. But you do want to teach them a replacement behavior for that motivation. Let me translate all of that. Let's go back to the example from the last video. There was a child whose behavior was repetitively saying mom over and over and over again to get her attention. So the purpose of the behavior in that instance that I gave was for attention. Now, it's important to understand that if you give in and you give attention to the repetitive mom, 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 then you have now given your child what they wanted, right? The purpose of their behavior was to get your attention, and they've gotten it. Like I said last time, it doesn't matter if it's a reprimand, if it's you yelling at them to stop, if it's you asking them what they want, if it's you reminding them to go somewhere, you've now given them attention. So you've reinforced their behavior. It's going to keep happening. It worked for them. That's all that means. Why is that important? Because now that you know that the motivation for that behavior is your attention, you can teach them a better behavior to engage in for your attention. It might also require for you to change your own behavior for a little bit. I mean, honestly, long-term would be best. That's going to maintain the appropriate behavior. Let me translate all of that. So in this instance, what you want to do is not give attention for the repetitive mom, 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 and give attention for the appropriate behavior that you want them to engage in to get your attention. You can choose what that is. Maybe it's tapping you on the arm. Maybe it's saying your name only once. Maybe it's putting their hand in the air. I don't know. Maybe you're a teacher. You can use this if you're a teacher. It works. The main thing is that you explain it to them. If they're super little, use very basic language, make sure they understand, and then practice it a bunch of times. But the main thing on your part is that now once you've made that rule, hey, I'm going to give you attention if you say my name just one time. If you say it more than one time, I'm not going to give you attention. You can try again later. Or I'm going to give you attention. You know, mommy will talk to you if you tap her on the shoulder. So the main thing on your part, again, is that you will give attention when your child engages in that behavior. Every time they do it appropriately. It's a lot of work on the forefront, but it's going to pay off in the long run. You won't have to deal with the repetitive, which turns into high-pitched screams of your name, or I mean, I've certainly seen kids where it escalates to the point where, you know, they'll go to another side of the room and knock something over just to get their mom's attention. And finally that works. So it's gotten even worse. You can avoid all of that if you just set a main rule and then stick to it. Another thing that I've had parents do is, for example, if their child does need their attention, they can turn to them the very first time they say their name and ask them to wait, and they'll get back to them in 1 minute and just set a timer. I work with kids directly with autism. I've used that with them. That's been effective as well. It helps teach them to wait and it helps them be more appropriate. A lot of the time they don't know how to wait, and so I'll give them choices. How do we wait? What can you do while you're waiting? You want to do this or this while you're waiting? Give them choices. It's a really long example, but I wanted to give you a lot of choices on ways to respond. It's not just a one answer thing. You can tailor it to your family and what works for you. Let's talk about a second example. Your child is throwing a tantrum because you have told them that they can't have candy. Let's say it's almost dinner time. That happens often. And the motivation behind your child's tantrum, or the purpose of their tantrum, is to gain access to candy. Now, if you give in and you give them candy, or let's say that you tell them no and then they start tantruming and then you realize what this is going to turn into and you're like, you know what, this is not a battle I want to fight. Whatever, just take the candy, not a big deal. Or you can have one piece, sure. So the purpose of your child's tantrum was to get candy. And if in any way they have gotten candy after you've told them no and they've thrown a tantrum, you've reinforced that behavior. So you've got to rewind and figure out something else to do in the future the next time something like this happens. So again, we know that the purpose was to gain access to candy. So in the future, what is a more appropriate way for them to get candy? We know that the motivation for your child's tantrum was to gain access to something. We'll just say a treat, because obviously it's not going to happen for candy every time, but maybe there are similar instances where they're throwing a tantrum because they want a cookie, because they want cake, because they want a popsicle, whatever it is, some kind of a snack. So we know that if that's the purpose, we need to give them an appropriate way for them to get it, right? It's not like we're going to say no forever. So what's the appropriate way? I always advise parents to think before responding. It's very important. I think it's perfectly normal for you to decide, you know what? I can give them one piece of candy because I don't want to deal with a 5-minute tantrum. So, or longer. So always think before you answer. Don't say no and then give in. Really, really, really bad. Because you're reinforcing your kid's tantrum if they're having a tantrum after you've said no and then you give in. But if you take a second, think about it, and then answer and say yes or no, and then follow through with that, you've now avoided a tantrum and you've avoided reinforcing tantrums, which are only going to get worse over time. I hope that makes sense. If the answer really is no, and your child throws a tantrum, then we know we don't want to give in. So then what are our options? We know that they want access to a snack. Maybe we can give them an option for a healthy snack. It can be really helpful to give options when we tell them no. It's another piece of advice that I found to be super duper helpful. The rest of us are given options when we're told no most of the time, at the store. Oh yeah, sorry, we don't have it in the back, but we have these over here if you want them. So it's the same thing with our kids, right? No big deal. And technically, you're teaching them a better coping behavior. So instead of screaming and throwing a tantrum when they're told no, you're teaching them how to make another choice, how to kind of accept their fate in regards to the candy and choosing something else. They're not always going to. They're going to have rough times. It's normal. But you can help make it better by always presenting choices, because you will cut down on tantrums. Guaranteed. I know that 100%. I've done it so many times over the years and it never fails. Once you teach them that you're not giving in, but they do have other choices, they'll understand that those are the rules. But if you give in every once in a while, you're going to maintain those tantrums, because they're going to be like, well, she gives in every once in a while. I'll keep trying. Just depends on how high their motivation is. So the takeaway is, take what the motivation or the purpose of the behavior is and flip it. Don't give that in response to the problem behavior or the tantrum behaviors, but give it in response to more appropriate behavior that you teach them. Sometimes it's teaching them the rule beforehand and then following through, and sometimes it's telling them in the moment. hey, you can do this or this. We know with toddlers, there's a lot of reminding, and it's normal. Their brains are still forming. We know their memories aren't great, although ironically, they're really great according to certain things. They'll remember, you said I could have ice cream later. So just understand that you have to be patient, take a lot of deep breaths. If you need a breather, walk out of the room, come back. It's okay. It's hard on all of us. Toddlers are a handful. I've got a freebie that I'm offering to go along with this series that I'm hoping will help you out. It's got a list of all of the purposes of behavior. There's 5 of them. How to identify them. So I've got a little data sheet in there if it's tricky for your child in a specific behavior they're engaging in. And then there's also the guide, which explains, okay, like if this is the purpose of the behavior, how should I respond for each of those purposes, and gives you some ideas of what you can try. If you try something, try it for 2 straight weeks at least. It takes some time, especially with toddlers. Again, a lot of reminding at first, but then once you start noticing that they're doing it on their own, you can fade back your reminders. And always make a huge deal anytime they do it on their own or they're trying to, as far as the appropriate behavior goes, because that's how you're going to teach it to them. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, if you're stuck on something, if something doesn't make any sense. Sometimes that happens. This stuff can get a little complicated. And put it in the comments below if you want. You don't have to email me. Otherwise, just subscribe, hit the notifications, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.